assemble teams from the best of Australia's car building and car tuning workshops to see who can build the toughest street monster. Our teams will go head to head in a final fuel-burning rubber shredding competition. Nathan Higgins has ported heads for 4 Bathurst winning cars. Today we check out Nathan's Ford Street Car package.
I've got a range of my own Australian-made heads now, like obviously made the LS head for quite a while now. Moved in, just finished my Ford head with a manifold and a Holden head as well, which hopefully later I'll make a manifold for the Holden as well. Like I've realised in the last couple of years that you've got to have both. It's no use having a good manifold and a terrible cylinder head. They both work together. I used to grind all the heads by hand. In about 2008, I decided to get a CNC machine. Had enough work for it. I brought it here in Melbourne off Premier Machinery. It was a Rottler, and yeah, never looked back. Like 5 years later, I brought my second one, and then 2 years after that, I brought my third one, and pretty much they run 24/7 now. I used to think that I was a good hand porter, but when I got the CNC machines, you just see how much core shift there is in factory heads. In this Ford Cleveland package we do the heads and then the manifold to suit. So it's fully CNC ported, then the manifold is fully match ported to the runners. You do not have to touch these heads and manifold, it comes fully ready to bolt on. The heads get cast in Thomastown, Melbourne. They come here, first up we fully machine them, bolt holes, spark plugs, recesses, you know, we cube the head pretty much. After that, it gets pressure tested. So once they get pressure tested, we fit the guides, we ream the guides, we hone the guides to size. Then they go in the CNC machines. They get roughed out to within about 50 thou of what they're going to finish at. Then we start putting inserts in, rough cutting the seats. Then they'll go back in the Rottler to get within 10 thou. Then they'll come over to the new one, we'll CNC the seats. Final cut is about a 10 thou cut. After that, then they go back to the pressure testers for their final pressure testing. We put them in the Rottler 3 or 4 times, it's probably a bit over the top, but customers are paying for a top-end product, so I like to give them a quality product. These Rottler machines, yeah, they're a 5-axis simultaneous machine. So I can digitise and machine all in the one machine. With the Rottler, we start with a developed port, which has been developed just with the experience. So it's already machined, it already has the datum points, which datum points on a cylinder head is the dowel pin. The dowel pin locates the cylinder head on the engine block. When I digitise what I have, then that gives you an outline, that gives you the actual program, so it's actually cutting to my measurements. The reason why the Rottler machines are so good is once you've digitised your prototype, you know, you've got either 8 inlet ports are going to be identical, 8 exhaust ports are going to be identical, 8 chambers are going to be identical. So that is the optimal way of making the engine's 8 cylinders run evenly. We do a couple of different versions of the manifolds, a 4500 version, do a 4150 version, and then we have a couple of injected versions as well. The difference between the 4150 and the 4500's, you know, carby sizes. This package was mainly designed for street cars, like pump gas. We set out to make the 850, 870 horsepower. In recent testing with Dandy Engines on a 460 cube motor, we went way past our goals, and on pump fuel we made 930 horsepower. And then we put that same motor on race fuel and went close to 980 horsepower. We can do the package a few different ways for you. We can sell them bare, no valves, no springs, or we can fully load them up with whatever valves you want to run, whatever springs you want to run. We can help you out with deciding what you need. Titanium valves, stainless steel valves, roller springs, hydraulic rollers, whatever tickles your fancy.
Next up, we head to Valley Grunt and check out their 1955 Mexican Street Rat.
We're currently building a 1955 Pontiac two-door coupe.
I actually first saw the 55 Pontiac for sale in America, and it was for sale at Pomona Swap Meet. And I looked at the car and I thought, geez, that's a cool looking car. Didn't like the flames in the front, still don't like the flames in the front. I like things shiny, and I thought the car is so straight, it would be such a great car to have it shiny. And my wife said, no, I like the hand-painted flames and I like the hand-painted patina of the car. So it is what it is, what you see today. And that's staying, unfortunately.
So it is a genuine Mexican car. And I like that the exterior has a little bit of history on it. You can see exactly where it's been. You can see that this has had a really bad, terrible flame job painted on it. And, you know, it's been a bit neglected and it's been a bit raced and it's been hot rodded. And that's what I like. It shows a little bit of my personality. It's got, you know, the car's got warts and all, and I like that. It's genuine.
The motor we're going to keep original. The motor's a 287, 1955 Pontiac engine.
We will be running straight out extractors that Shane will be making by hand with gates in it so that when we do drive it on the road, they will run through a normal exhaust system. But when we race it, we open the gates up and run it straight out the extractors, which should be exiting out of the front wheel arches. We haven't determined the box yet, but we will be running a more late model manual box on it with a hydraulic clutch so that I can push it, and it will be comfortable to drive because it's nothing worse than sitting in traffic with a heavy clutch.
Ermi, my wife, is going to own the car. This is the car we're building for her, and basically we're going to call the car War Squaw, basically because the female Indian is called a squaw, and it's fitting being that it's a female driver. When it comes to pulling a car apart like this, we basically need to retain everything. We don't throw a single thing away because a lot of the stuff you just can't buy anymore. The panels are all put together with wood screws. That's how they were done back in the factory. So we're going to undo all the wood screws, remove all them, put them in a container to get CAD plated.
The old glass, is it still available? Have you got to reuse the glass? So you've got to be careful if you've got to take it out and resave it. Rubber seals and stuff like that, they're going to be perished and hard, so you've got to be careful when you take those out. So the front screen's going to get replaced with a new one for roadworthy issues. The rear screen, we're going to reuse that. There's nothing wrong with that. New rubber seals will be supplied, so we'll put new rubber seals around it when it goes back in.
If it's rusted through the roof, that's usually the end of the car. But this is like the day it was made. It's perfect. It's obviously never had any other windscreen other than that windscreen in it. When I drove the car and actually had a bit of sunlight in the front of it, was a bit of a hard job to look through it. They made these in Australia but as a sedan, but they were all armour plate. They never had laminated screens in Australia until later on. The guards are welded on. Somebody at some stage has decided that bolts were too hard to obtain. So how do we fix this? Hang on. I think we'll crack out the welder and we'll weld the panels on. Perfect. So basically we've got to come out with Mr. 1 mil and remove the panels. And then eventually when it comes to the time of putting it back together, we'll make the correct factory style brackets and bolt it on like it was supposed to be.
It wouldn't be the first time that Shane and I have worked late nights and weekends and to get a car ready for an event, whether it's a client's car for nationals or somebody's car for their wedding. And our kids are very understanding and they will be down here hands-on as well because, you know, we work as a family sometimes. So, and it's something to fall back on. It also gives that level of appreciation in the amount of work that's involved in building one of these cars.
Coming up, we meet Spiro Papadamatos from Autotech Engineering in Sydney. With over 25 years in the game, we find out how it all started.
My earliest memory of a car was my father's car. Again, happened to be a HQ Kingswood. Yeah, grew up with HQs and Holdens all our life. My first car was a VL Turbo. I was very fortunate. My father bought me the car. At the time, they were still a police car. Mine was an ex-police car, and yeah, I thought I was king of the road with that car.
I met Spiro, I was on a holiday with a girlfriend in Queensland in the Surfers Paradise. We got on really well, and when we met and started talking, we actually realised that we actually didn't live too far away from each other.
I was standing on a balcony and I looked down from the 27th floor and I saw two pairs of legs, and I happened to call out. One of those pair of legs happened to be my wife.
Spiro drove a white VL Commodore, which was, I think, the first love of his life. My family, we were a family of Holdens and Commodores, so he got on well with my dad as well. You could actually hear him coming from a mile away, his turbo whistling.
I started the business 8th of August 1993, so 25 years ago exactly. Our first factory was 2 doors down. We rented that factory and we bought the next 2 along, and we're in these 2 factories now. And I had a really good friend of mine who had a dyno that we used to use, and he used to help me a lot. He was really open to helping me because I used to build engines and I'd get him to tune them. And I invested in my first dyno back in 1995, I think it was. Well, being a die-hard Holden man, and basically my performance work was based on the Holden market. I worked on a variety of vehicles back then as well, you know, that I used to service and maintain and repair, because obviously the performance business had to grow. So always had aspirations of building powerful engines or powerful cars, and we eventually got there with a good crew behind me.
We've just clicked over a quarter of a century, 25 years at Autotech. I've been here for about 17 years. Our Autotech customers, they're cars enthusiasts, and it's not just about their car, it's their hobby, it's what they enjoy doing, whether it's in their spare time, weekends. A lot of them come in and say, this is like a toy shop for me. I feel like a kid in a candy store. I could stay here all day and just watch what's going on. You're very lucky to work in a place like Autotech Engineering. And I do agree, I'm very lucky to see the wide variety of vehicles that we do.
All I've concentrated on is expanding the business, and every year we've gone forward. That's why we're one of the busiest workshops in New South Wales, probably one of the busiest in the country. The dynamometer itself used to clock up 28,000 K a year, so that'll tell you how much tuning was going on here. I've now got my work crew here to the level that I'm very content with, and look forward to our achievements with what we have now, because now I've got probably, I believe, the best mechanics in Sydney, in my opinion. I got involved with the Japanese market when I saw the turbo market changing, when we started to get grey imports. I still remember the first engine build I did on a Subaru when I started to get involved. It was for a gentleman called Frank Nemchek. It was a 99 Subaru WRX, and we never looked back since. We pump out hundreds of them. They're a big market. We have a pretty good following with Subaru Australia-wide. We get a lot of cars sent to us from all over Australia. The biggest accolade I could say we've done with Subaru has been our own car that we built for the racetrack. We've done so well at the racetrack with clients' cars, and we really needed to get serious with one, and so we can compete on a world-class level, which we did do. We now have Australia's fastest Subaru, and officially we could be one of the fastest in the world. If not the fastest, the second fastest for sure.
The Blue Chem Fuel System Cleaner is added directly to the fuel tank for up to 80 litres of unleaded fuel. Using nanotechnology by cleaning and lubricating, Blue Chem Fuel System Cleaner will protect and clean your entire fuel system from condensation and carbon deposits to form a combustible liquid which burns cleanly away. Create a long-lasting protective film on all surfaces from corrosion. This will result in added performance, better fuel consumption and reduced emissions. After the break, we catch up with Rob Vickery from the Horsepower Factory as he compares cold air intakes for V8 Commodores.
Today we're going to be doing cold air intake comparison on this VF2 6.2 litre Commodore. The car already does have some upgrades. It's got a small camshaft and some CNC ported heads on it, full exhaust, and as you can see, it's already got a VCM cold air intake, but we're going to use it just to get a baseline, and we're going to put a standard air intake back on it to start off with, and then go through the comparisons of Walkinshaw cold air intake, Harrop OTR, and then the VCM OTR. So between the 4 intakes, we want to just get a nice comparison so we can see what difference it makes. Now, the fact it's modified doesn't really matter that much, to be honest with you. Experience tells me that we're still going to get similar results on a stock car, but I just want to show everyone what the difference between the intakes is and see if there's any surprises. This air intake I've got in my hands is a Walkinshaw side mount cold air intake and utilises a K&N air filter, which most people would be familiar with. But it also uses what they call a zip tube. Basically, it's a larger diameter and more free-flowing than the factory unit. Best way to tune these cars is to leave the airflow meter in there. The only time we would remove it is when we're getting into an engine or a supercharger or something that's making a lot of power and the airflow meter is starting to become very restrictive. A lot of people will just put on a cold air intake tube with an air filter hanging under the bonnet, not enclosed to anything, and effectively all you're doing is sucking in hot air. This airflow meter with the air temp sensor built into it is looking at the air temp coming into the engine and compensating the timing. So by putting in a supposedly cold air intake to improve the performance, you're actually probably going backwards because what you're doing is sucking hot air, and the computer will compensate for that by pulling timing out, and your performance will be reduced. It's really important that the air filter is enclosed and in this case is sucking air from behind the headlight to ensure it's cold air coming into the engine. And the bottom line is you're improving the flow. We're going to look at 2 different OTRs today, and one being the Harrop unit, which I have in my hands, and we're also going to look at the VCM unit, which is also what Walkinshaw use. Both are what they call OTRs, or over-the-radiator cold air intakes, and you can sort of see pretty clearly that the concept is this sits basically between the front of the car and the throttle body and draws air in from in front of the radiator. Harrop have done a great job. It's injection moulded. So the K&N filter is sandwiched between the 2 housings and then has clips that basically clip on around the outside to ensure that it has a good seal, because that's really important. The design basically of having that really force air into the engine via the throttle body, we actually do see a benefit at the drag strip where, you know, towards the end of the track when you're doing, say, 120 mile an hour, 110 mile an hour, you can imagine the air being forced in the front of that and into the engine, and you do see a difference between a traditional air intake and a over-the-radiator cold air intake like this of maybe, you know, 1, 2, 3 mile an hour. The VCM one is very similar in design to the Harrop. The difference between this and the Harrop is you can see you've got these clips that are part of the body which you unclip to separate the 2 halves, whereas with the Harrop it actually uses a metal clip which clips over the 2 halves, which is probably a little bit clunkier maybe in my opinion. It's probably nicer that these are part of the body. Most of these will do right through from VE to VF Series 2 now. Again, you can see there's a rubber on the back. We talked about that on the Harrop one. The idea is obviously that gives you a seal to the airflow meter, and then there's another small rubber that goes from the airflow meter to the throttle body. On the road, these definitely show colder intake temperatures over a traditional air intake or even an aftermarket side mount, and that does translate into better performance, better throttle response, and it all comes back to that same concept of by reducing the air intake temps, the engine will allow it to run more timing and make the engine feel more lively and more responsive. Another really good product, certainly well manufactured. Standard, the car made 272.5 kilowatts of the wheels. From there, we fitted the Harrop OTR, and that yielded a result of 286 kilowatts at the wheels. The surprise of the test really was the Walkinshaw side mount air intake. because that actually made slightly more than the Harrop OTR. That actually made 288.6 kilowatts of the wheels. Finally, we finished off with fitting the VCM cold air intake, and that made 291.1 kilowatts of the wheels. So that made the most out of all of them. When people come to us and say what would be the first upgrade I would do on a stock car, air intake would be my first go-to with a tune. I hope that sort of enlightens people a little bit on the differences between standard air intake and an aftermarket air intake and why you would change it.
Next time on Rides Down Under Workshop Wars, the boys from HBW rip into the VK Commodore. Superformance adds some flair to an old Torana, and Rob Vickery winds back the clock. If you think you've got what it takes to be part of Workshop Wars, contact us for our next season.